Hello, this is Eden Mendez, and this is my International Politics class presentation on Canada. Some of the topics we will be covering today are Canada at a glance, the colonial history of territories and provinces, modern Canadian government, the role of the monarchy, current events, and the upcoming elections. Canada at a glance. The land area of Canada is slightly larger than that of the United States, comprised of about 9,093,507 square kilometers of land and 891,163 square kilometers of sea. The population is 38,794,813. The official languages of Canada are French and English. Some of the major ethnic groups in Canada are Canadians, Europeans of English, Scottish, French, Irish, German, or Italian descent, Chinese, First Nations, Indian, Ukrainian, and Métis people. Canada is a federal parliamentary democracy under a constitutional monarchy. The Canadian Confederation. The UK formed the Dominion of Canada from 3 British North American provinces, the Province of Canada, Nova Scotia, and New Brunswick in 1867. The Province of Canada was split into the provinces of Ontario and Quebec, and the capital was established at Ottawa. The UK added most of its remaining land in North America to Canada, creating the Northwest Territories in 1870. The area around the city of Winnipeg was made into the province of Manitoba. And in 1871, the former colony of British Columbia joined Canada as the 6th province. The former colony of Prince Edward Island joined Canada, making it the 7th province in 1873, and the Yukon Territory was designated in 1898. In 1905, the provinces of Alberta and Saskatchewan were created out of part of the Northwest Territories. In 1949, the Dominion of Newfoundland became the 10th province, Newfoundland. In 1999, Nunavut became the largest and newest territory in Canada, with the majority of the population being comprised of the Indigenous Inuit community. The Constitution Act of 1982. In 1982, the Constitution Act allowed for the surrender of parliamentary power from the British Parliament to the Parliament of Canada through patriation. This placed the power to amend the Canadian Constitution in the hands of Canadians and led to full Canadian sovereignty. Canada's relationship with its First Nations. Canada has been working to improve its relationship with its Indigenous community, comprised of the First Nations people, the Métis, and the Inuit. The legacy and history of forced integration, forced relocation, and the separation of Indigenous children from their families has left a painful mark in Canadian history. Through the efforts of modern legislation, educators, and community outreach, Indigenous communities have gained more sovereignty in how affairs on reservations and membership in bands or nations are determined. Efforts to create reparations for survivors of residential schools have been made, as well as creating schools that teach traditional history, language, and culture along with modern curriculum. The Canadian government. Canada is a parliamentary democracy with a constitutional government. The Parliament is comprised of the King, represented by the Governor-General, the Senate, and the House of Commons. The House of Commons is responsible for debating Canadian issues, voting on the creation of laws, and serving as part of the checks and balances that holds government accountable. Members of Parliament sit in the House of Commons to represent their local communities, known as electoral districts or constituencies. Canadian MPs typically belong to a political party and have a set of priorities pursued by that party or a platform. The Prime Minister and Cabinet sit in the House of Commons, allowing MPs to directly question the Prime Minister and the government ministers. To stay in power, the government must have the support of a majority of MPs, also known as having the confidence of the House of Commons. The Senate. The Senate is a legislative body responsible for reviewing and assessing proposed bills before they are passed. The Senate has 105 members appointed by the Governor-General, who exercises their power on the advice of the Prime Minister. In 2016, an open application process was established to allow Canadians to apply for positions in the Senate. They are evaluated based on public, merit-based criteria in order to identify Canadians who would make a significant contribution to the work of the Senate. The role of the monarchy. Historically, Canada is comprised of land acquired by the British rule and was made a dominion by the British North America Act of 1867. While the British Parliament no longer governs or makes rules for Canada, the British monarch continues to serve as the monarch of Canada. Charles III is the King of Canada and head of state. The Governor-General represents the King in Canada. While the Canadian Constitution places executive power on the King, the power in practice is exercised by the Prime Minister and government ministers. The Constitution Act of 1982 patriated the British North America Act to Canada and added Canadian dependence on the Parliament of Westminster and defined its independence. While the King cannot take any action of his own accord, he can speak on behalf of the nation when requested by its government and people. Current events. U.S.-Canada relations have been strained coming into 2025. Under the direction of President Donald Trump, the U.S. imposed 25% tariffs on steel and aluminum on Canada in retaliation for what the president calls an extraordinary threat posed by illegal aliens and drugs. Retaliatory tariffs have been recently imposed by Canada on the United States on an estimated value of $29.8 billion in imports. U.S. and Canadian relations have become strained due to the imposition of tariffs and threats of annexation by President Trump, spurning boycotts of American goods, boycotts of travel to the United States, and an increased movement to purchase Canadian-made products. With the likelihood of an early election looming in the near future, Canadians are expressing concerns with U.S.-Canadian relations and how this could potentially impact voter issues and political party platforms. Canada's international ties. CANZUK is an acronym for the Proposed Trade Alliance of Canada, Australia, New Zealand, and the UK. The goals of this political alliance is to increase trade, foreign policy cooperation, military cooperation, and share common social values and political systems. The EU. In light of recent tariff escalations between Canada and the United States, Canada has been focusing on strengthening its trade ties with the EU. Canada has had positive relationships with the EU since 1959 and is part of the Canada-EU Strategic Partnership Agreement and the Canada-EU Comprehensive Economic and Trade Agreement. Canadian elections. With the resignation of former Prime Minister Justin Trudeau and uncertainty looming due to the recent trade war, the Liberal Party has designated Mark Carney to serve as Prime Minister while elections are called. By law, the maximum time between federal elections in Canada is 5 years. While the next vote is officially scheduled for October 20th of 2025, there are certain scenarios that could trigger an early election. An early election can be called when the Governor-General accepts the Prime Minister's advice to dissolve the government, or the Government-General accepts the PM's resignation after the government is defeated in a confidence vote in Parliament. Canadian political parties. While this is no mean an exhaustive list of Canada's political parties, we will touch on some of the major players. The Liberal Party. Canada's Liberal Party is centre-left and has won the majority of elections in Canadian history. The Liberal Party has historically focused on social justice, legalization of cannabis, climate change, and establishing a mixed economy with increased taxes on the wealthy and well-funded social programs. Conservative Party, also nicknamed the Tories. Canada's Conservative Party is traditionally centre-right and has been drifting slightly more to the right. They have won the second highest number of elections. They hold more conservative social views and an economic policy that focuses on lower taxes, free market principles, investment in gas and oil pipelines, but are also supportive of Canada's universal healthcare system. The New Democratic Party, or the NDP, is left-leaning. While the NDP has not formed a government on their own, their significant efforts and policy have consistently made their support relevant in minority governments. One of the NDP's major victories was the establishment of Canada's universal healthcare system. The Bloc Québécois. The Bloc Québécois leans left and focuses on issues pertaining to Quebec's culture and language history, the concept of Quebec's sovereignty, and supporting programs like universal healthcare. The Green Party. The Green Party leans left and focuses on environmental sustainability, free or low-cost access to higher education, universal childcare, and universal basic income.